of assessment and assessment support is to increase confidence and improve assessment practice, provide an overview of assessment opportunities, and then once we get into our breakout rooms, to share examples of assessment approaches from your perspective and opportunities for you to share your experiences, successes and challenges. And once we are through the Mentimeter questions and the evaluation that we will get from you at the end of this, we'll use this experience to inform future workshops and products. And in terms of the scheduling of today, we do have some slides, some reasonably straightforward, quick slides to go through with you on the topic of assessment, but the majority of today is a good 25 minutes each in a couple of breakout rooms, one of which will be led by Isabel and Diane, who are working in the area of social services and childcare, and one which will be led by Margaret, who, as you know, is working in the area of accounting. And those are the two places where we're hoping to get lots of excellent conversation and sharing of practice. So without any further ado, we will just crack on with the content today. So next slide, please, Jordan. Super, thank you. Just hopefully you'll get onto that quite quickly. And our first question is, how would you rate your current confidence in developing assessments? Super. Okay, so we've crept up to about 17 there. So I think we'll maybe skip on to the next question. Interesting to see that we're well over halfway in terms of current confidence in developing assessments. That's very good news. This one is a question where you will enter some free text. And the question is, what have been the biggest challenges you've faced when developing assessments? Interesting to see that, yes, we're getting that acknowledgement that having time to develop assessments can be challenging, but interesting to see the other aspects coming through, challenges to do with adapting and marking criteria, first time developing. Sometimes there's a bit of worry around this. Aspects coming through to do with the wording, getting agreement in your centres. That's a very interesting word cloud. Interesting to see appetite for innovation being a challenge. And ensuring clarity. Yep, that's a good one. Getting it right. Yep. You kind of apply that to many areas of work and life, couldn't we? Getting it right. Okay, super. Thank you for that. And if we can skip on to the next question now, Jordan. So that was about your challenges, but what have been your main successes when developing assessments? So lovely to see acting on IV feedback, using a variety of methods, different approaches. Lots of positive words in there. Engaging learners and the students being happy. What a great outcome. Nice to see integration coming through. We've got some slides exploring integrating assessment to come. Good to see the planning words coming through too. Improved PIs, that's super. And students enjoying it. Student enjoyment, student engagement, students happy. Okay, with those happy and positive thoughts in mind, we'll move away from the Menti at the moment and get cracking on the slide deck that we have to share with you. So I've got a few slides to run through, which are taking more of a kind of background approach to this issue of producing assessments. So it's very tempting, isn't it, to get focused on the task at hand. But the bigger picture is that when thinking about producing assessments, there are many components to be considering. And an important one is planning, remembering what the broad aims of the course are, as well as the unit requirements and the context that you are working within for you students, the sector context that is your own. Collaboration and communication between team members is so very important. How well is your team collaborating and talking with each other and making use of all the rich insights that will be available in your team and in your college, and not just in your team and in your college, but perhaps beyond that, looking at your IQA process, your internal quality assurance, your quality team within the college, and of course the expertise of the external quality assurers and the touch point meetings that you have. Assessment is not always summative. There is formative and diagnostic assessment too, with very different purposes from summative assessment. And overall, it's important to always hold on to the principles of assessment, that what we produce needs to be valid and reliable, practicable, equitable, and fair. And that feels perhaps a little on the sort of big picture side, but we are firmly of the view that planning, collaboration, thinking about assessment and holding on to those assessment principles are the good background work which is required, and that good assessments will flow if we start by thinking about the big picture. So next slide, please, Jordan. So next-gen units can remain at 1 SQA credit, but up to 5 SQA credits in size, and the vast majority are 3 credits or more. And this offers opportunities for more project-based assessment and meeting that next-gen vision of bigger units and fewer units. So NextGen allows greater choice of forms of assessment evidence as well. For example, digital evidence or the use of authentic problems or case studies. So there are many opportunities. Many of those would have been available to you previously in our existing NextGen qualifications, but these are very much foregrounded in the NextGen development. So I'm going to stop now with the background thoughts, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Walter to take the slides forward.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jane. It's actually very important what you've said about the big picture approach to the planning and design of assessments. And actually, while you were speaking, it reminded me of the work of John Biggs in relation to constructive alignment and its importance, ensuring that our approach to teaching and learning is aligned with the methods and instruments of assessment. We need to ensure that learners are not actually going to encounter contexts or concepts in assessment that they've not already been exposed to as part of their learning experience. So, for example, if we've only ever given students access to short response questions, then we certainly don't want to ask them to write a 500-word essay for the final assessment. But anyway, the two things that we're looking at in particular today are combining and integrating assessments as a means of further reducing the assessment load. You might ask, well, are these not one and the same thing? Well, not exactly. In combining, we are taking 2 or more existing assessments and putting them together into a single assessment event or a single instrument of assessment. And from that assessment evidence, we can then infer performance back to the original component assessments. When we integrate assessment, there's a slightly different premise, and that is that we are designing a new assessment for a selection of outcomes of knowledge, understanding, and skills that are closely related or similar. So these outcomes may be in the same unit, or they could be drawn from across several units. And then, having selected those outcomes, we then design a new assessment that will yield evidence of competence for each of the several outcomes to be assessed. So combining assessment makes full use of existing assessment instruments, perhaps with some slight modification, whereas integrating assessment requires the design of a new assessment instrument, usually in the form of a case study or a project. So next slide, please. So what are the benefits that we might accrue from this strategy? Well, an obvious benefit is a reduction of the time that our learners will spend in assessment episodes in comparison with their outcome by outcome assessment. And also in comparison with outcome by outcome assessment, these combined or integrated assessments most likely give us a better assurance of overall competence. And it improves motivation for learners when they understand that these forms of assessment are intended to reduce the overall load of assessment for them, and also to help them in their understanding of the connections, the relationships between units and outcomes and topics. And importantly, this type of assessment allows both them and us to synthesize their knowledge and skill sets. So the next slide, please, Jordan. Now, when considering the integration of assessment across units, we want to make sure that the content of the units are indeed sufficiently related to make the integrated assessment coherent and meaningful to the learners, and to help them to see that the connections between the outcomes that are being assessed in an integrated assessment. But when considering combined assessment, we've got to look out for the danger of extending the level of demand beyond what was in the original individual assessments. So even although we might only be putting a wrapper around them, might we also be asking them to exhibit a skill set that is not in any of the unit outcomes? So some assessment methods like projects or assignments lend themselves quite more readily for combining and integrating outcomes. So I can give you an example from my own specialist topic, which is computing. A student in the HNC computing might be studying the computer science unit, the software development unit, and the web development unit. And when we look at the outcomes for those three units, we've got write a computer program in computer science, build a software application from the software development, and code a website for the web development. And we can see that there's a real opportunity there to make a significant impact of reducing assessment by asking them to code the website. That will involve evidence that can be used in the other two units. The other caveat for us is to avoid creating complex evidence requirements, because that would be counterproductive, both for the learners and for assessors, and introduce unnecessary barriers for them in accessing the assessment itself. So we've got to think about that too. How do students access these combined or integrated assessments? So thanks, Jordan. I'll go on to slide 9. So the next two slides speak about two other aspects of assessment that are closely related, and these are sampling and inference. Now, sampling, of course, is at the heart of assessment because any assessment episode provides only a sample of all that a learner is capable of producing. And so we infer competence by assessing a representative proportion of a learner's work rather than every individual learning requirement. And as we know, sampling is a useful tool that we can use to help reduce the assessment load for learners and ourselves as assessors, particularly when assessing all the knowledge or skills would require a large volume of evidence to be gathered and assessed. In cases like that, it's good practice, good assessment design practice to specify a sampling frame. That will help us in two ways. It ensures that any specific elements of knowledge or skills are always included in the sample, and to make sure that the sample itself is of sufficient size. Because obviously a sample needs to be large enough to give confidence of competence for the learner across the outcomes of the unit. And the next slide, Jordan. And inference is also central to the assessment process. So we are going to draw conclusions about a learner's knowledge, understanding, and skills from their performance or behaviours in one or more assessment tasks. So that's inference. So it's crucial then that our assessment design must allow meaningful interpretations of evidence to make judgments about learning progress. And there's one final but important angle to inference, and that is being able to infer knowledge and understanding from the performance of a task that is in itself intended to assess a skill's competence. So I'll just close with a wee example of that. A car mechanic might diagnose a fault in a car, locate and remove the faulty component, identify a suitable replacement part, install it, and test it for success. And in successfully completing that task, the learner not only shows the practical competence about using diagnostic tools, for example, but they demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of the function of the component that they're working with. So we can actually step that up a wee bit by questioning that auto mechanic as he's doing the work. We can say, excuse me, why are you selecting that component? Why are you using that particular tool to install or extract the component, and so on? So this approach would also require careful recording to ensure that we have enough evidence for the purpose of quality assurance. So that's a quick canter through the kind of key things that we wanted to have you consider today.